Hello, everybody out in social media world. Can you let me know if you can hear me? I don't have a tech team. Let's see. And testing 1, 2. Camera, audio, testing 1, 2. Okay. And I'm going to try to go live on TikTok as well. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Corinne Coker Esquire of the Coker Law Firm. I am here today to talk to you about the newest news when it comes to Diddy and Sean Combs. There is another complaint that has dropped. I do want to give you guys my disclaimer. I am an attorney, and even though I'm going to be talking about legal stuff today, anything that I provide to you is for informational purposes only. It's also my legal analysis. However, it is not legal advice. If you would like legal advice, you need to contact an attorney on your own. And nothing that I say here or even if I go back and forth with you or talk to you in the comments, creates an attorney-client privilege. Other attorneys often go on there and say, my opinions are my own. I don't really have to say that. I own my own law firm, so I don't, my opinions are my own, and they're the opinions of me owning this law firm. So again, we are here today to talk about Diddy's newest complaint. So just to give you guys a little heads up, I am streaming on StreamYard. So right now it is streaming on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. I have not been able to tackle how to stream on Instagram using StreamYard. So I'll just post it there later. And I'm also on TikTok. So if you see me going back and forth with my eyes, it's between camera number 1, camera number 2, and me looking down at my iPad, which holds the complaint. So getting into this is a complaint that was filed in the Southern District of New York. Rodney Jones versus Sean Combs, Justin Dior Combs, his son, Ethiopia, and I cannot pronounce her last name, so you do have to excuse me. I'm very sensitive about names, so I'm sorry, but it's Habtemarian, Lucian Charles Grange, Christina Coram, Charlize Recording Studios, Love Records, Motown Records, Universal Music Group, Combs Global Enterprises, and various Jane Does. So just like with the Cassie complaint, this complaint came with a trigger warning. This document contains highly graphic information of a sexual nature, including SA. Additionally, there are graphic images of the aftermath of a shooting, redacted images of S, redacted images of minors, S workers, and people that work in that S business. I'm trying not to get put in Facebook jail or banned again. It also includes S trafficking and the illegal distribution of guns and drugs. So again, I'm just making sure that people can see me. So just by way of background, even those who know me know that I do practice in the area of trademark and copyright law. However, for 20 years prior to this, I was a litigator. I did practice in the area of criminal law as well as civil law. Just to let you know, this is a civil complaint. This complaint was filed in civil court. It's not a criminal complaint. Therefore, nobody is looking to lock up Sean Combs, a.k.a. Diddy, or the other various parties. They are seeking damages in civil court. And so what it says is that plaintiff Rodney, a.k.a. Lil Rod Jones, he has brought a complaint against all of the individuals that I told you about. This is based in New York, and I am going to give him the allegation. So, in a civil suit, people, they say what they are suing for. They give their facts as known to them, and therefore those are allegations. I know a lot of times when you listen to bloggers or journalists, they say allegedly, allegedly, alleged. I'm not going to say that. It's an allegation. All of this is alleged. All right. And what's interesting and also disturbing, if you're like me and you're in a Gen X generation, you kind of grew up with some of these people. So this is kind of heartbreaking. But one of the one of the defendants, or excuse me, one of the people that have been listed as a defendant as Sean's son, Justin Dior Combs, son of him and Misa Hilton. So let me get into this. Now, I just want to let you know that the complaint does also have pictures of the defendants, as well as some of the acts that have been alleged. Okay, a little background about Rodney, Lil Rod Jones. He was born and raised in Chicago, Illinois. He's the second son and fourth child of 9 siblings. He comes from a long line of gospel music influencers. He started playing instruments at the age of 5. He started playing in the church. He's considered a musical prodigy. For the duration of his career, he's worked on the South Side of Chicago, the Chicago music scene, playing with legendary greats. The summary of events. From September 22 to November of 23, Mr. Jones produced 9 songs on Mr. Combs' Love album. Mr. Jones lived with Mr. Combs for months at a time, spending holidays, birthdays, and missing major family events. Mr. Jones resided at Mr. Combs' residences located in Los Angeles, New York, Miami. He also spent several weeks on a yacht rented by Mr. Combs in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Throughout his time with Mr. Combs, Mr. Jones witnessed, experienced, and endured many things that went far beyond his role as the producer on the Love album. The claims raised in this complaint have been corroborated through witness statements, video/audio recordings, and images that Mr. Jones has in his possession. Mr. Combs required Mr. Jones to record him constantly, which is crazy. On several occasions, Mr. Combs took Mr. Jones' cell phone and began recording himself. As a result, Mr. Jones has secured hundreds, and hundreds is capitalized in bold, hundreds of hours of footage and audio recordings of Mr. Combs, his staff, and his guests engaging in serious illegal activity. Mr. Jones has secured unrefutable evidence of A, the acquisition, use, and distribution of ecstasy, cocaine, GHB, ketamine, marijuana, and mushrooms, the displaying and distribution of unregistered illegal firearms, Mr. Combs providing laced alcohol beverages to minors and S workers at his homes in California, New York, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and Florida. Mr. Combs' chief of staff, Christina Coram, they call her KK, instructing her staff to retrieve drugs so that she can provide it to Mr. Combs for his consumption. Christian Combs drugging and sexually essaying a woman. Mr. Combs detailing how he planned to leverage his relationship with Bishop T.D. Jakes to soften the impact on his public image of the Cassie lawsuit. Young Miami's cousin or assistant S.A. Mr. Jones. Actor Cuba Gooding Jr. S.A. and harassing Mr. Jones. Rapper Redacted on Mr. Combs' yacht, consorting with underage girls and S workers. R&B singer Redacted in Mr. Combs' Los Angeles home, consorting with underage girls and S workers. So he then gets into a shooting incident at the Chalice recording studio. He states on or about September 12th, 2022, Mr. Combs held a writers and producers camp at the Chalice recording studio at 845 Highland Avenue, Los Angeles. Present at this camp were Mr. Combs, his son Justin, and Justin's friend named G. G is a 30-year-old tall African American male. There were others that were present at this camp. One evening during camp, Mr. Combs, Justin, and G were in a heated conversation. The conversation moved out of the studio and into a restroom adjacent to where Mr. Jones, the complainant, was sitting. Mr. Jones was approximately 2 feet away from the bathroom when gunshots rang out. Mr. Jones recalls hearing multiple gunshots. Mr. Jones immediately went into a state of shock and feared that he would be shot next. Mr. Jones genuinely believed that he would be shot through the door due to how close he was. After the shooting ended, a crowd gathered around the restroom. When the door finally opened, Diddy and Justin exited. G was lying on the restroom floor in a fetal position, holding his stomach and bleeding out of his leg-hip area. Everyone stood around looking at him. Frustrated by the lack of aid to G, Mr. Jones, the complainant, dropped everything, ran to G, and immediately placed pressure on G's gunshot wound to his stomach. As he was applying the pressure on his stomach, Mr. Jones realized that G was gushing blood from another area near his leg/hip. Mr. Jones lifted G and brought him to the ambulance at the studio's front. At this time, Mr. Combs and Justin disappeared into another part of the studio. Mr. Combs gave strict instructions to inform the police that he had nothing to do with the shooting. He also forced Mr. Jones to lie to the police by telling them that G was shot standing outside the studio by a drive-by assailant. And he includes some news stories about the incident, or he includes a news story about the incident. Mr. Jones has the clothing that he wore that day and believes it may still have stains and DNA of G's blood. And he includes screenshots, which are pictures of the bloody scene in the bathroom with blood on the floor and other on people's clothing. Clearly, G was not shot outside the studio as Mr. Combs instructed his team to report to law enforcement. Mr. Combs and other defendants provided private security for the writers' camp at defendant CRS. Security was purest and lackluster at best. The fact that neither Mr. Combs and Justin Combs were allowed to enter CRS with guns, the fact that either Mr. Combs and Justin Combs were allowed to enter CRS with guns, and those guns were not confiscated by security, is a clear breach of duty by Mr. Combs and various defendants. As a result of the shooting, Mr. Jones is severely traumatized. Mr. Jones now suffers from PTSD, severe anxiety, depression, and insomnia. Next, Mr. Jones was essayed and assaulted by Mr. Combs. Again, these are the allegations in the complaint. Throughout the time of living with Diddy, Mr. Jones was the victim of constant unsolicited and unauthorized groping and touching of his back area by Mr. Combs. These events took place in LA, New York, Florida, and the Virgin Islands. In addition to the unsolicited and unauthorized touching, Mr. Jones was forced by Mr. Combs to work in Mr. Combs' bathroom as Mr. Combs walked around naked and showered in a clear glass enclosure. As a heterosexual Christian man, Mr. Jones was uncomfortable with Mr. Combs' advances and expressed his discomfort to Mr. Combs' chief of staff, Christina Coram, KK. KK responded to Mr. Jones' complaint with, Sean will be Sean. KK also attempted to downplay Mr. Combs' groping of Mr. Jones' back area and other bits as friendly horseplay, stating that those acts were Mr. Combs' way of showing that he likes you, Mr. Jones. Despite these assurances, on several occasions when Mr. Combs began to undress and walk around the house naked, KK would say, "Okay, I'm leaving now," and she would disappear. KK's hypocrisy is breathtaking at best and enabling at worst. Mr. Jones believes that KK aided and abetted Mr. Combs' SA of him and was working with Mr. Combs to groom him into accepting a homosexual relationship. Through these deviant acts, one would say that Mr. Combs has a pattern and practice of engaging in such nefarious activity. This ongoing conduct shows that Mr. Combs cannot be rehabilitated. Next, Mr. Combs attempted to groom Mr. Jones into engaging in gay S. Mr. Combs was aware that Mr. Jones looked up to and idolized producer Stephen Aaron Jordan, better known as Stevie J. Stevie J is an American DJ, record producer, and TV personality. He was a part of the Bad Boys production team, The Hitmen. In '97, Stevie J won a Grammy Award with his work with Puff Daddy. This is going through a bunch of Stevie J's accomplishments. Mr. Combs used access to Stevie J and his knowledge of Mr. Jones' admiration of Stevie J to groom and entice Mr. Jones to engage in homosexuality. Mr. Combs went so far as to share a video of Stevie J backdoor penetrating a Caucasian male without protection. This was done to ease Mr. Jones' anxiety concerning homosexuality. According to Mr. Combs, this is normal practice in the music industry. Look, even Stevie J is doing it. Mr. Combs informed Mr. Jones that he had engaged in S with a rapper, with an R&B singer, and with Stevie J. Mr. Combs promised to make sure that Mr. Jones wins Producer of the Year at the Grammys if he engaged in homosexuality. The following are screenshots of video of Stevie J backdoor penetrating a Caucasian male that Mr. Combs provided to Mr. Jones. So they're saying that Puffy Diddy gave this to Mr. Jones. There are some footnotes. I'm just trying to figure out what they belong to. Give me a second. Oh, and just by way of background, again, this is the complaint that was filed in the Southern District of New York. This is not a fake complaint. I did get it off of Pacer, which is the federal website in which people file complaints and their cases are registered. All right, moving on. Thanksgiving 2022. Mr. Jones is SA'd by Young Miami's cousin. On Thanksgiving Day 2022, Mr. Jones was in Mr. Combs' house located in Miami. Young Miami and her female cousin were also present. Mr. Combs was intoxicated and offered cocaine to Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones rejected him and proceeded to walk into the restroom. While using the restroom, Young Miami's cousin burst into the bathroom and began groping Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones believes that Mr. Combs sent her in there to SA Mr. Jones. As she entered the bathroom, she dropped to her knees and began performing oral on Mr. Jones' exposed member. Mr. Jones pushed her away and exited the bathroom. Young Miami's cousin did not accept Mr. Jones' rejection as she proceeded to follow Mr. Jones out of the bathroom. She started undressing and attempted to straddle him to have S with him in the presence of Mr. Combs and his staff. Once again, Mr. Jones pushed her off. The following are images from a video of Young Miami, her cousin, Mr. Jones, and Mr. Combs. So there are some pictures in the complaint. Young Miami's female cousin has not been named, so apparently he probably does not know the name of her. Trafficking and Victims Protection Act. Throughout the time with Mr. Combs, Mr. Jones was transported from California to New York, Florida, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Mr. Jones was forced to solicit S workers and perform S acts to the pleasure of Mr. Combs. On or about February 4th, 2023, Mr. Combs forced Mr. Jones to bring prostitutes and S workers back to his home in Miami, Florida. The S workers that Mr. Combs forced Mr. Jones to bring back to his home. On or about February 2nd, 2023, Mr. Jones believed that Mr. Combs drugged him. Mr. Jones recalls waking up naked, dizzy, and confused. He was in bed with two S workers and Mr. Combs. He also recalls aimlessly wandering around the house with no clothes on. And there's a blurry picture depicting, allegedly depicting S workers in Mr. Jones' bed the morning after being drugged. On another occasion in Miami on Thanksgiving night of 2022, Mr. Combs asked Mr. Jones and DeForest Taylor to enter the studio bathroom. He asked them for a $100 bill because he wanted them to do cocaine with him. Mr. Jones was scared, but luckily he did not have a $100 bill. So Mr. Combs waited until a little later to do coke with Young Miami. Later that evening, he required Mr. Jones to solicit S workers from Booby Trap on the river, located at 3615 Northwest South River Drive, Miami. Mr. Jones did so, and Mr. Combs forced him to engage in unsolicited SA with these workers. The A in that case is acts as opposed to assault. As a part of Mr. Jones' sex worker recruitment tools, Mr. Combs provided Mr. Jones with an exclusive bad boy baseball cap and required him to wear it to Booby Trap on the river as a signal to any S worker he approached that Mr. Combs was in town and had sent Mr. Jones to recruit them. Mr. Jones had no desire to visit Booby Trap on the river. Mr. Jones had no desire to solicit S workers from Booby Trap on the river. Mr. Combs used his power and influence to intimidate and force Mr. Jones into soliciting S workers from Booby Trap on the river. As detailed below, Mr. Combs used many tactics to maintain dominion and control of Mr. Jones. So just a break here, because I know what some people are thinking. I've talked about this online even prior to coming on live, and a lot of questions were asked that are typically asked in these type of situations, such as, why did he not just leave? Is this just a money grab? Why did he not file a criminal complaint? These are all legitimate questions. I just wanted to let you guys know that I'm acknowledging that. All right, he provides pictures from Instagrams of the S workers that Mr. Combs required Mr. Jones to solicit and have S with them at his home in Miami, Florida. Mr. Jones had no desire to solicit or have S with the individuals in the previous paragraph. Mr. Combs used his power and influence to intimidate and force Mr. Jones into soliciting and sleeping with these women. The following is the phone number of another S worker that Mr. Combs required Mr. Jones to solicit and perform S acts with him in Miami, Florida. And he has the number in the complaint that is redacted. Mr. Combs used many tactics to maintain dominion and control of Mr. Jones. He promised him a Grammy for Producer of the Year for the Love album. He offered him $200,000 to purchase all the instruments he wanted. He promised him ownership of his $20 million property at One Star Island in Miami, Florida. He promised access to record label execs like defendants Lucian Charles Grange in Ethiopia, whose last name I cannot pronounce. I apologize. Mr. Combs would often switch up his approach. He would go from promising Mr. Jones the world to threatening Mr. Jones with physical harm. Mr. Combs threatened to eat Mr. Jones' face and informed Mr. Jones that he's willing to kill his mother, Janice Combs, if he must, in order to get what he wants. So he wouldn't think twice to harm Mr. Jones. Mr. Combs and Justin Combs solicits drugs and engages in illicit acts with minors and workers. On or about July 2nd, 2023, in California, Mr. Combs had a listening party at his home. Present was an R&B artist, redacted, Justin, workers, and some underage girls. The event began at 7 p.m. Mr. Combs requested female workers and required Mr. Jones to solicit them. An hour later, several workers appeared. In addition to the workers, there were at least 5 women in the crowd that were under the age of 16. Mr. Combs forced all the women to drink lace DeLeon liquor. I'm sorry if I don't know the name of the liquor. Upon information and belief, Mr. Combs laced the liquor with ecstasy. Mr. Combs did not check the identification of any of the underage girls. The presence of the underage women made Mr. Jones very uncomfortable. He attempted to leave. Mr. Combs forced him to stay. Mr. Combs went so far as to take Mr. Jones' car keys to prevent him from leaving. After being forced to drink the DeLeon shots, Mr. Jones began feeling lightheaded and recalls passing out and waking up at 4 a.m. the following morning with a naked worker sleeping next to him. Screenshots of the video from the night are embedded below. The attorney that wrote the complaint states that he is in possession of the video and will provide a copy to the court. And there are some still pictures that are supposed to depict Diddy with underage women. Mr. Combs attempts to pass off Mr. Jones to Cuba Gooding Jr. So I did note in here that Cuba Gooding Jr. was not listed as a defendant, and I was wondering if he was going to be listed or he was going to be sued in a later complaint. Mr. Jones believes that Mr. Combs was grooming him to pass him off to his friends. The fear became reality when Mr. Combs introduced Mr. Jones to Cuba Gooding Jr. while they were on Mr. Combs' yacht. During the introduction, Mr. Combs suggested that Cuba get to know Mr. Jones better. He then left them alone in a makeshift studio on the yacht. I guess this picture is supposed to depict Diddy and Cuba Gooding Jr. Mr. Combs and Cuba Gooding Jr. moments before Mr. Jones is assaulted. As evidenced by video, of which screenshots are embedded, Cuba Gooding Jr. began touching, groping, and fondling Mr. Jones' legs, his upper inner thighs near his groin, and the small of his back near his buttocks and his shoulders. Mr. Jones was extremely uncomfortable and proceeded to lean away from Mr. Gooding Jr. He rejected the advances, and Mr. Gooding Jr. did not stop until Mr. Jones forcibly pushed him away. The following is a screenshot of the incident, and this depicts Mr. Jones with, allegedly, Cuba Gooding Jr. in his arm around his neck at the studio. The Love Album. Throughout the time with Mr. Combs, Mr. Jones was under an implied work for hire agreement. So he was not an employee, he was under work for hire. He was not compensated for his time living with Mr. Combs or for the songs that he produced. As evidence, he is listed as producer of the following songs on the Love Album final release. He lists the songs. Mr. Combs and other defendants all benefited from Mr. Jones' work product. They failed to compensate Mr. Jones from his work. As a result, Mr. Combs and other defendants are unjustly enriched at the expense of Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones attempted to work with Mr. Combs to secure his publishing and royalty rights for the work that he completed on the Love Album. Mr. Combs offered Mr. Jones $29,000 for 13 months, thousands of hours of work, and 9 songs that made it to the Love album. Ironically, Mr. Jones was willing to take $50,000, his publishing and royalties. Mr. Combs' self-serving greed would not allow him to pay Mr. Jones an additional $21,000. In a footnote, the attorney writes, this writer has retained other creatives, artists, and writers who have experienced the same treatment from Mr. Combs and will file suit in the upcoming weeks. Excuse me. If you guys have any questions or comments, please definitely write them. I will get to them after I finish going through the complaint. Mr. Combs' deceptive business practices became so bad that Mr. Jones was left with no choice other than to make a public plea on social media for Mr. Combs to pay him for his work. After publicly requesting that Mr. Combs do the right thing and pay him fairly, Mr. Jones received an onslaught of threatening messages from Stevie J and Love Records A&R DeForest Taylor. There's a footnote. As the A&R of Love Records, DeForest Taylor did not require Mr. Jones or any of the other creatives, musicians, or artists to sign a DNA or NDA. Mr. Combs used his power and influence to threaten and intimidate Mr. Jones. According to Mr. Jones, Mr. Combs is very forceful and demanding. Mr. Combs does not take no for an answer. Cat Williams said, you got to tell him no. And Mr. Combs would often threaten to inflict bodily harm on Mr. Jones if Mr. Jones did not comply with his demands. As detailed above, Mr. Combs threatened to eat Mr. Jones' face. On another occasion, while standing in Mr. Combs' bedroom, Mr. Jones was forced to watch as Mr. Combs displayed his guns and bragged about getting away with shooting people. Mr. Combs shared that he was responsible for the shooting in the nightclub in New York with rapper Shine. He shared that artists and Mr. Combs' girlfriend at the time, Jennifer Lopez, a.k.a. J-Lo, carried the gun into the club for him, passed him the gun after he got into the altercation with another individual. Mr. Jones was terrified of Mr. Combs and he felt like he could not tell him no. Mr. Combs consistently made it clear that he has immense power in the music industry and with law enforcement. Mr. Combs made it clear that his head of security, Fahid Muhammad, Mr. Muhammad, had the power to make people and promises disappear. And he provides a picture of Mr. Muhammad. Mr. Combs instructs his staff to always contact Mr. Muhammad if they are ever pulled over by the police in Miami or California. Upon information and belief, Mr. Muhammad spoke to the LAPD after G was shot at CRS. The LAPD was in CRS and witnessed the blood in the restroom, and they went with the bogus claim that the shooting of G occurred outside of the studio. This was all thanks to Mr. Muhammad's connections with law enforcement. Mr. Jones has no reason to disbelieve Mr. Combs, as he has seen firsthand through the shooting of G and the subsequent silence of LAPD and the media that Mr. Combs indeed had power to harm him. The LAPD spent hours in CRS after the shooting of G, yet there were no arrests. Mr. Jones witnessed the LAPD in the restroom pictured above, yet no arrests were made. The morning after the shooting, Mr. Jones and several others arrived at CRS, and G's blood was still on the floor of the restroom, and Mr. Combs hired a cleaning crew to clean up. All right. Defendants: Ethiopia, Lucian Charles Grange, Motown Records, Love Records, Universal Music Group, and others. all profited off of Sean Combs' RICO enterprise. Mr. Jones recalls seeing defendant Grange visiting Mr. Combs in the Miami, Florida home, as well as in the LA home. There's a footnote. Excuse me, I'm still reading the footnote. It's pretty long. All right, the footnote has to do with TikTok and its failed contractual negotiations between Universal and TikTok for some music. According to Mr. Jones, whenever defendant Grange visited Mr. Combs at his homes, it would be in the evening, and he and Mr. Combs would disappear for hours in Mr. Combs' bedroom. Defendant Grange sponsored and attended several Love album listening parties at Mr. Combs' home in LA. These parties were sponsored by the other defendants. As evidenced above, these parties had S workers and underage girls present. During these parties, defendant Grange knew or should have known that Mr. Combs was drugging the attendees through laced bottles of tequila and Ciroc vodka. It is no secret that Mr. Combs had specific bottles of alcohol designated for females and other bottles designated for his staff, his artists, and himself. This fact was detailed by former artists and bodyguards of Mr. Combs. As a sponsor of these events, defendant Grange had a duty and obligation to ensure that the S workers and underage girls were not present and that Mr. Combs was not spiking the alcohol with date rape drugs. As the sponsor of these events, defendant Grange had a duty and obligation to ensure that the S workers and underage girls, I just said that one. There's a lot, y'all. On the YouTube channel, The Art of Dialogue, former bodyguard Jane Doe exposed Mr. Combs' pill mixing method used to spike cranberry juice and orange juice. According to Mr. Doe, Mr. Combs would place ecstasy and other date rape drugs in these juices. On YouTube, The Art of Dialogue, former artist Mark Curry exposed Mr. Combs spiking the bottles of Moet champagne in the VIP section of the nightclubs. Mr. Combs would have a set of Moet champagne bottles for his artists and a set for the women. I'm sorry, just reading some of the comments. This writer has spoken to several former employees of Mr. Combs who witnessed defendant Coram instruct her staff to lace the champagne, Dion, and Ciroc liquor bottles with ecstasy and other illicit drugs. Mr. Jones recalls seeing defendant, again, I'm sorry about the mispronouncing of the last names, Habtemiriam, visiting Mr. Combs' home in Miami and LA. According to Mr. Jones, whenever defendant Habtemiriam visit Mr. Combs at his homes, it would be in the evening, and she and Mr. Combs would disappear for hours in Mr. Combs' bedroom. According to Mr. Jones, defendant Habtemiriam visited Mr. Combs at defendant CRS during Mr. Combs' writing camp. Defendant Habtemiriam sponsored and attended several Love album listening parties at Mr. Combs' home. This next section, it states, defendant Christina Coram is the Delane Maxwell to Sean Combs' Jeffrey Epstein. And they include a picture of Ghislaine and Jeffrey Epstein. According to Mr. Jones, during the 13 months he lived and traveled with Mr. Combs, he witnessed Mr. Combs display and distribute guns from his bedroom closet in Miami, Florida, and LA to questionable individuals all dressed in black. According to Mr. Jones, during the 13 months that he lived and traveled with him, he witnessed defendant Coram openly order her assistants to keep Mr. Combs high off gummies and pills. Defendant Coram required all employees from the butler, the chef, the housekeepers to walk around with a pouch or fanny pack filled with cocaine, GHB, ecstasy, marijuana, gummies, 100 to 250 milligrams each, and Tushy, a pink drug that is a combination of ecstasy and cocaine. That's a new one for me. I haven't done criminal in a very, very long time. It was important to defendant Coram to have Mr. Combs' drug of choice immediately ready when he asked for it. Mr. Coram, defendant Coram ordered sex workers and prostitutes for Mr. Combs. Defendant Coram ordered and distributed ecstasy, cocaine, GHB, ketamine, marijuana, and mushrooms to Mr. Combs and his celebrity guests who were present on his rented yacht in his homes in LA, New York, and Miami. On multiple occasions, defendant Coram forced Mr. Jones to carry Mr. Combs' drug pouch against his will. As chief of staff, defendant Coram was instrumental in organizing and executing the RICO enterprise. Defendant Coram and the following individuals execute the following tasks for the RICO enterprise. Stevie J recruits as workers and attends and participates in freak-offs. Footnote, we have a video of Mr. Combs, Stevie J, Plaintiff Jones at a strip club. Mr. Combs is recording the video while coaching and training Plaintiff Jones how to recruit the S workers. B, Justin Combs solicits prostitutes, underage girls, S workers, and would engage in the freak-offs. C, Brendan Paul works as Mr. Combs' mule. He acquires and distributes Mr. Combs' drugs and guns. D, Frankie Santella works alongside Brendan. While Brendan acquires and distributes Mr. Combs' drugs and guns, Frankie carries the money and pays for the drugs and guns. And he provides pictures of Brendan and Frankie. Moy Bond hires S workers and participates in the freak-offs. Apparently, this is a picture of Moy Bond. Mr. Combs funded and used his affiliation with local gangs and gang leaders who would frequent his homes in LA and Miami to secure drugs and guns he obtained and distributed out of his homes in LA and Miami. Defendants executed their RICO enterprise with threats of violence, threatening to eat plaintiff's face, displaying and distributing guns in plaintiff's presence, bragging about having law enforcement under control, bragging about murdering people, bragging about bribing witnesses and jurors in the criminal case concerning the 1999 New York nightclub shooting with Shine. Defendants executed their RICO enterprise with threats of isolation from music and entertainment industry, parading powerful music industry executives such as defendants that are listed above as parties filled with S workers, minors, and illegal drugs that were listed above. Defendants executed their RICO enterprise with threats of non-payment for work completed, fake promises of cash payment, the $250,000, Producer of the Year Grammy Awards, and guaranteed access to future products, and the $20 million home on Star Island in Miami. Mr. Combs is allowed to wreak havoc. While living and traveling with Mr. Combs, Mr. Jones discovered that Mr. Combs has hidden cameras in every room of his homes. Mr. Jones believes that Mr. Combs has recording of defendants Lucian Charles Grange, Ethiopia, as well as other celebrities, music label executives, politicians, and athletes. Upon information and belief, these individuals were recorded without their knowledge and consent, as in the case of the homosexual tape of Stevie J that Mr. Combs provided to Mr. Jones. Mr. Combs possesses compromising footage of every person that has attended his freak-off parties and his house parties. Upon information and belief, due to the treasure trove of evidence that he has in his possession, Mr. Combs believes that he is above the law and untouchable. Upon information and belief, Mr. Combs employs Jose Cruz as his IT director. This writer has spoken to former employees of Mr. Combs who confirmed that Jose Cruz is the gatekeeper to Mr. Combs' recordings. Upon information and belief, Jose Cruz intentionally hides behind the camera and from social media and the internet due to all the incriminating acts he was required to record for Mr. Combs, and he provides a redacted telephone number for Mr. Cruz. Okay, so those are all of the facts alleged. I do see a comment that somebody is saying guilty until proven innocent. Everybody coming out just wants to get paid. Let the burden of proof with evidence be given to a jury. Absolutely. But the thing is, the way these things start, the way these court cases start, are with a complaint. Somebody has an allegation. So what happens in these cases, sorry, another message. What happens to these cases? Oh my goodness, apparently I got somebody banned. I'm sorry. With a civil case, there is a complaint. So all of these are allegations. The defendant, Sean Combs, Justin, all the executives, all of the companies, all of the Jane Does that may, come out in the future. Oh, I'm sorry, I messed up. I moved from TikTok. They will provide an answer to the complaint. Give me a minute, y'all. Right here. Okay. So these are the allegations from Mr. Jones. All of the defendants can answer the complaint. And then what happens in a civil suit, if it is not settled, because what happened in the Cassie suit, there is a complaint, and within 24 hours, Diddy settled it. There was no answer. There was no discovery. So what is discovery? After this complaint and the answer, all of the parties have a chance to get information from each other, which is called discovery. They will submit questions to the other party. That party will give their answers. They will ask for documents. They will ask for videos, pictures, footage. This is all a part of the discovery process. And then there is a time for depositions where they bring people in and question them. So this is the part of the legal process that we say that you guys see on TV. When they come into a conference room, they're questioned, there's a court reporter there, and people are asking questions of them. At any point during this process, the parties can settle. They can stop this. So I've gone through the facts that have been alleged. Let me go through the causes of action. What they said that the defendants did wrong. Number one, conduct and participate in RICO enterprise through a pattern of racketeering activity, violation of the Racketeering Influence and Corrupt Organization Act against various defendants. So what the plaintiff is saying, Mr. Jones, is saying that some of the defendants are 100% liable for the action of Sean Combs, Justin Combs, Christian Corham, as they were acting in their capacity as the Respondeat Superior Collective employees when they committed the acts detailed above. So they're basically saying that they were the bosses and they instructed everybody else. And as a result, they're responsible for what everybody else does. I am scrolling through a bunch of the legal mumbo jumbo. Okay. They state that the members of the RICO enterprise all share a common purpose: to enrich themselves financially and sexually at the expense of producers, musicians, writers, creators, and artists by maximizing defendants' revenues through fraudulent means. Defendants benefited from their scheme to defraud plaintiff, Mr. Jones, by intimidating plaintiff with threats of violence, threatening to eat plaintiff's face, displaying and distributing guns in plaintiff's presence, bragging about having law enforcement under control, bragging about axing people, bragging about bribing witnesses and jurors in a criminal case concerning the 1999 New York nightclub shooting with Shine, threats of isolation from the music and entertainment industry, parading powerful music executives in front of them, drugs and money. Again, I'm scrolling through a lot of the legal mumbo jumbo. Okay, defendants committed multiple acts of mail fraud. Defendants voluntarily and intentionally devised and participated in schemes to defraud plaintiffs out of money in reliance on the mail. Defendants committed these acts with the intention to defraud plaintiff Jones and the artists, creators, musicians, and producers. Defendants used the mail for the purposes of executing their fraudulent scheme. And when they talk about the mail, they are referring to wire payments, cash payments. There's more about mail fraud. Again, wire payment, cash payments. All right. The second cause of action, SA and S harassment against Mr. Combs. So this is against Diddy individually. As described above, Mr. Combs frightened and placed plaintiff in an apprehension of harm when he was physically and SA'd from October 22 to October 23 in Mr. Combs' homes in Miami, the Virgin Islands, and LA. Mr. Combs forcibly touched and attempted and or threatened to touch plaintiff's intimate areas and or touched plaintiff with his own intimate body parts. Mr. Combs violently gripped and palmed Mr. Jones' back area and front area without consent. Mr. Combs forced Mr. Jones to work in Mr. Combs' bathroom and watch Mr. Combs as he showered. Mr. Combs forced Mr. Jones to work in the studio while Mr. Combs stripped naked to get body massage. Mr. Combs forced Mr. Jones to work while Mr. Combs walked around naked. As a result, plaintiff has suffered and continues to suffer harm, including physical injury, severe emotional distress, humiliation, anxiety, and other consequential damages to which he is entitled in award of monetary damages and relief. The third cause of action, California's bystander negligent infliction of emotional distress. So this is against Mr. Combs and defendant Justin Combs. So I don't know if you guys recall how Misa came out months ago when there was an incident, I believe, with Justin. I believe he had a DUI, and she came out on social media and she said that, she's no longer going to stay silent. Diddy's going to be exposed. She's angry that he has their son involved in his shenanigans for lack of a better word. Okay. Mr. Jones brings this claim against Mr. Combs and Justin Combs for the shooting. The elements of the bystander act, number one, that he's closely related to the injury victim. Two, is present at the scene of the injury producing event at the time it occurs, and is then aware that it is causing injury to the victim. And three, as a result, suffers serious emotional distress, a reaction beyond that which would be anticipated in a disinterested witness, in which is not an abnormal response to the circumstances. So essentially, he's saying that he is emotionally damaged by being within feet of G when G was shot. It states that Mr. Combs and Justin Combs' intentional deception caused a delay in G receiving immediate medical care as the ambulance parked 3 blocks away from CRS out of fear that there was an active shooting. Mr. Jones had to run down the block and convince them that the shooting had ended. These events traumatized Mr. Jones, and he suffers. The fourth cause of action, SA. This is against the Jane Doe, who has been identified as Young Miami's cousin. It states that Young Miami's cousin frightened and placed plaintiff, Mr. Jones, in apprehension of harm when she physically and SA'd him on Thanksgiving Day 2022 in Mr. Combs' home in Miami, Florida. The fifth cause of action, Premise liability for the SA committed by Jane Doe. I'm moving on because a lot of this repeats itself. 6, cause of action. Premise liability for the SA committed by Cuba Gooding Jr., who, as I stated, was not listed as a defendant, and I don't know why. Here, Mr. Jones was SA'd by Cuba Gooding Jr. on a yacht rented by Mr. Combs. Mr. Combs was present while Mr. Jones is being assaulted. Mr. Jones was legally on the premise as a guest and an invitee of Mr. Combs. Cuba Gooding Jr. was legally on the premise as a guest and invitee of Mr. Combs. Mr. Combs owned, through renting, the premises and had dominion and control over the premises where Mr. Jones was harmed. 7th, cause of action, Trafficking and Victims Protection Act. This is against Sean Combs, Justin Combs, Christina Coram, and Combs Global. He states that they all intentionally participated in, perpetrated, assisted, supported, facilitated an trafficking venture among other things, that they, the defendants, knowingly and intentionally recruited, enticed, provided, obtained, advertised, and solicited by various means Mr. Jones as well as other class members, knowing that defendants would use means of force, threats of force, fraud, coercion, and a combination of such means to cause Mr. Jones as well as others, some who were under the age of 17, to engage in commercial acts. The 8th, cause of action, California premise liability, inadequate or negligent security. Essentially stating that there was negligent or inadequate security at the recording studios when G was shot. The 9th, cause of action, aiding, abetting, and inducing a trafficking venture. Stating that Mr. Combs and the co-conspirators benefited financially in receiving things from participation in the Combs trafficking venture, including payments and other compensation from Mr. Combs. The 10th, cause of action, this is against Young Miami's cousin, emotional distress. All right, so 10, 11, 12, 13, all deal with the issue with Young Miami's cousin. 14, knowing beneficiary in a sex trafficking venture against the other defendants, not Mr. Combs or Justin. Y'all, I'm exhausted. This is a lot. I'm on page 58. I think there's like 74 pages. They're basically saying that Mr. Combs was providing vast sums of cash, which made the trafficking venture possible. And he gave the cash to the other defendants. The cash was also a necessary and required part of Mr. Combs' recruitment of plaintiff Jones, as well as the workers, prostitution, and underage minors. The cash provided went far beyond providing routine sponsorship, partnership, and employer compensation for a subordinate. The sheer number of listening parties, yacht parties, nighttime writers' camp, after parties for which the defendant sponsored went far beyond the normal music industry. All right. 15th cause of action, obstruction of the enforcement of the Trafficking Victim Protection Act against the other defendants. I'm scrolling because a lot of this, again, is just very repetitive. And the prayer for relief. So the plaintiff, Mr. Jones, is asking for a judgment against the defendants. He's asking for an award of damages in an amount to be determined at trial, plus interest, including but not limited to loss of past and future income, wages, compensation, seniority, and other benefits of employment, although he was work for hire. But punitive damages, and a demand for jury trial. So this was filed by Tyrone A. Blackburn, Esquire. It's T.A. Blackburn Law. I believe he is based in New York. He has also been involved in some other major suits. I got to verify to continue on TikTok. Sorry. Oh, goodness. All right. So attorney Tyrone Blackburn, I know that he was involved in the suit against T.I. and Tiny. He's brought suit against Airbnb. Yeah, UPS. So he's been around for a while and he's been involved in some major suits. So the things that I found interesting with this complaint is the fact that he said that there are more complaints that are coming soon. In order to file this complaint, he did come up with pictures and videos that he said were provided by plaintiff. Obviously, I have not seen them. This is just paperwork. He did provide some still videos, but obviously these will be made available to the court and to into opposing counsel. So, do you guys have any questions? Give me a moment while I check the comments. Okay. Somebody said that there's an interview going around with Columbus Short that makes the complaint not as crazy. That is true. I know that Orlando has been making comments, but Orlando, I forget his last name. I believe he was on That's So Raven. He's pretty much been like written off by the industry as somebody that has mental issues, but as these events are coming to light, people are looking like, hey, maybe he has mental issues because of some of the things that he's gone through. I'm surprised that Diddy is not in Bali right now with Russell Simmons, where there's no extradition. We're going to see what happens. Again, Cassie's suit, it settled in less than 24 hours. Is this suit going to go away? We don't know. We're not going to know until we see what happens. Are there going to be other lawsuits? Are people going to be paid off? It sounds like people have been paid off for 20, 30 years. So let me know what you think. Let me know if you have any questions about the complaint or about the way the law works when it comes to civil suits. So again, my name is Corinne Koger, Esquire. I'm at the Koger Law Firm. Please feel free to inbox me with any questions or leave comments under the video. Thank you.